Imagine waking up on your 30th birthday, thinking you are a failure, only to find out you own the world. Sarah didn't know she was the silent architect of a $100 billion tech empire. She just thought she was a devoted wife, struggling to save her marriage. But when her husband walked into her birthday party holding another woman's hand, the veil of lies didn't just tear, it exploded. Before we dive into this web of power and betrayal, I'd love to know where in the world you are watching from today. Drop your city in the comments. And if you love stories where the underdog finally takes their throne, make sure to subscribe to Her Quiet Empire and join our community of story lovers. Now, let's begin. The shadow of a titan. The morning air in the penthouse was cold, despite the floor-to-ceiling windows letting in the golden Chicago sun. Sarah sat at the kitchen island, a lukewarm cup of coffee between her hands. She looked at her reflection in the polished marble, pale skin, tired eyes, and a spirit that felt like it had been sanded down by years of being the supportive wife. Her husband, Mark, was the CEO of Ether Dynamics, the fastest-growing tech conglomerate in the hemisphere. He was the face of the future. He was the man on the covers of magazines. And Sarah? Sarah was the woman who had dropped out of her PhD program 6 years ago to help him build it. She was the one who stayed up until 3:00 a.m., fixing his code when the company was just a garage startup. She was the one who signed away her rights to the intellectual property when Mark told her it was better for the investors if only one name was on the masthead. "It's for us, Sarah," he had whispered back then, kissing her forehead. "One day you'll have everything." Today was that one day, her 30th birthday. She had spent the last week planning a small, intimate gathering at a local park, a place that reminded them of their humble beginnings. She wanted to reconnect. She wanted to remember the Mark, who used to look at her like she was the only star in the sky, not the Mark who now looked at her like a piece of furniture he'd forgotten to dust. As she dressed in a simple green gown, the same color she wore on their first date, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe today he would finally acknowledge how much she had sacrificed. Maybe today the distance between them would vanish. The park and the public humiliation. The park was beautiful, decorated with simple balloons and a single white cake that read, "Happy Birthday." Sarah. About 20 of their friends were there, mostly Mark's business associates, who looked slightly uncomfortable being in a public park instead of a 5-star ballroom. Sarah waited. She smiled until her face ached. She greeted guests who barely looked her in the eye. But Mark was late. He was always late. The man, Arthur, didn't even glance at Mark. He kept his eyes fixed on Sarah. "My name is Arthur Vance," he said. "I am the chief counsel for the Evergreen Trust. And I believe there has been a massive misunderstanding." Mark laughed nervously. "Arthur, now isn't the time. My wife and I are just settling some personal matters." Arthur finally looked at Mark, and his expression was one of pure, icy contempt. "Mr. Sterling, you are under the impression that you own Ether Dynamics. You are under the impression that you have the authority to issue a divorce, settlement, or fire anyone." Arthur turned back to Sarah and reached into his briefcase, pulling out a leather-bound folder embossed with a gold seal she hadn't seen in a decade. "Sarah," Arthur said softly, "your father's 10-year silent period ended at midnight last night. The trust has dissolved and the assets have been transferred." Sarah froze. Her father, the brilliant reclusive programmer who had died when she was 20. He had left her a small portfolio of patents, or so she thought. He had told her she had to prove she could build something on her own before she could touch her inheritance. Arthur opened the folder and turned it towards Sarah and the crowd. "Mark Sterling, you didn't build Ether Dynamics with your own capital," Arthur stated, his voice booming across the park. "You used the seed money from the Evergreen Trust, per the ironclad architect clause in the founding documents. The person who provided the original IP and the initial funding holds 100% of the voting shares upon the trust's expiration." Arthur handed Sarah a shimmering titanium card. "Sarah Sterling," he said, "you aren't a liability. You are the sole owner of the Evergreen Holding Group, which owns Ether Dynamics, its subsidiaries, and even the building your husband currently works in. Your net worth as of 5 minutes ago is $102 billion. Oil." The silence that followed was absolute. The wind seemed to stop blowing. Mark's face went from smug to a ghostly, translucent white. Chloe dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the pavement. Sarah looked at the papers. She looked at the card. She looked at the man who had just tried to buy her silence for $50,000. A new light entered her eyes. The quiet woman was gone. "Arthur," Sarah said, her voice steadying, growing cold and sharp as a diamond. "If I own the company, that means I own Mark's contract, doesn't it?" "Body and soul, ma'am," Arthur replied with a faint, predatory smile. Sarah stood up. She didn't wipe the tears away. She let them dry like war paint. She looked at Mark, who was now trembling, his mouth hanging open. "Mark," she said, leaning in close, mimicking the way he had bullied her moments ago, "you were right about one thing. Ether Dynamics does need a new image, and you're fired." But the shock was only beginning. Arthur leaned in and whispered to Sarah, loud enough for Mark to hear. "There's more, Sarah. We've been auditing the books in anticipation of today. Mark hasn't just been cheating on you. He's been stealing from the trust. Embezzlement to the tune of $400 million. The FBI is waiting at your penthouse right now." Mark's eyes bulged. He looked at Chloe, but Chloe was already backing away, looking for an exit. "Wait!" Mark screamed, reaching for Sarah's arm. "Sarah, honey, it was a joke, a test. I wanted to see if you were still the strong woman I married." Sarah stepped back, letting his hand fall into the dirt. "The test is over, Mark," she said, "and you failed." But as Sarah turned to leave with Arthur, a notification chimed on every single phone in the park. A video had just been leaked. Not a video of the party, but a video from inside Sarah's own home, recorded just an hour ago. Sarah looked at the screen of a guest's phone. Her heart stopped. The video showed Mark and Chloe in Sarah's bedroom, but they weren't just talking about the divorce. They were holding a small, glowing device Sarah recognized instantly. It was the source key, the only physical hardware that could override the entire global network of Ether Dynamics. And in the video, Mark was handing it to a man whose face was blurred, saying, Once the bitch signs the papers, the system is yours. Just make sure she disappears permanently. I don't want any loose ends." Sarah looked up. The FBI Arthur mentioned weren't the only ones looking for Mark. Suddenly, 3 black vans screeched to a halt around the park perimeter. Men in tactical gear, with no insignia, jumped out. They weren't looking for Mark. They were aiming their weapons directly at Sarah. "Arthur," Sarah whispered, her blood running cold. "Who are they?" Arthur's face went pale. "Those aren't my men." Mark suddenly grinned, a manic, desperate look in his eyes. He looked at Sarah, then at the gunman closing in. "You might own the money, Sarah," Mark hissed, "but you forgot who owns the shadows. If I can't have the empire, no one will." The air in the park turned electric. The birds stopped chirping, and for a heartbeat, the only sound was the heavy thud of tactical boots hitting the pavement. Sarah stood frozen, the $100 billion titanium card still clutched in her hand, a piece of metal that felt useless against the barrels of submachine guns. "Mark, what have you done?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, but her eyes locked on the man she once loved. Mark didn't answer with words. He answered with a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. He stepped behind one of the masked gunmen, using the armed mercenary as a human shield. Chloe, sensing the shift in power, scurried to Mark's side, her face twisted into a mask of cruel triumph. "You always were too smart for your own good, Sarah," Mark shouted over the idling engines of the black vans. "You thought you could just walk away with my life's work? You think a piece of paper from your dead father makes you a titan? This is the real world. Power isn't inherited. It's taken." Arthur Vance, the lawyer, stepped in front of Sarah, his arm outstretched. "Sterling, this is madness. These men, this is high treason. You're kidnapping the head of a global sovereign trust." The lead mercenary stepped forward, his voice muffled by a tactical mask. "We don't care about trusts. We care about the source. Key. Mr. Sterling says the girl has the biometric override." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. The source key. Her father hadn't just left her money. He had left her the heart of ether, the core code that ran the world's satellite arrays, power grids, and financial encryption. Mark hadn't just been cheating. He had been trying to sell the literal backbone of modern civilization to the highest bidder on the black market. "Titkai, I don't have it," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "And even if I did, I'd die before I let a parasite like you touch it, Mark." "That can be arranged," Mark sneered. "Take her. Kill the lawyer." As the mercenaries moved in, Sarah felt a strange vibration in her palm. It wasn't her phone. It was the titanium card. The metal was glowing with a faint, pulsing blue light. Suddenly, a deafening hum filled the air. From the sky, 4 sleek, silent drones, models Sarah recognized as the ether, guardian prototypes she had designed herself 3 years ago, descended with terrifying speed. They didn't fire bullets. They fired concentrated electromagnetic pulses. Pop! 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 The mercenaries' electronic sights went dark. Their radios hissed with static. The black van's engines died instantly, smoke curling from their hoods. The gunmen stumbled back, clutching their malfunctioning gear. A voice boomed from the lead drone, a voice Sarah knew better than her own. It was a digital reconstruction of her father's voice. "Protocol. Bloodline Defender active. Authorized user, Sarah Sterling. Threat level, terminal. Commencing neutralization. What is this? Up, Mark screamed, looking at the sky in terror. I'm the CEO. I have the codes. You have the old codes, Mark, Sarah said, stepping out from behind Arthur. She looked at the drones, a tear finally escaping her eye. Her father had known. He had known Mark's nature before she ever did. He had built a ghost in the machine to watch over her. The source key isn't a device, Sarah realized aloud. She pressed her thumb against the biometric strip on the titanium card. I am the source key. The drones swiveled their sensors toward Mark and Chloe. Red targeting lasers dotted Mark's chest. Wait, Sarah, please! Chloe shrieked, falling to her knees. It was all his idea. He forced me. He said he'd kill me if I didn't help him. Mark looked at his mistress in disgust. You pathetic little— Quiet, Sarah commanded. The word wasn't a shout, but it carried the weight of $100 billion and a decade of suppressed pain. Mark fell silent. The reckoning. At that moment, the real authorities arrived. Not the mercenaries, but a convoy of federal vehicles led by the director of the FBI. Arthur had timed the reveal perfectly. As the agents swarmed the park, disarming the confused mercenaries and zip-tying Mark and Chloe, Sarah walked slowly toward her husband. He was slumped against the side of a dead SUV, his expensive suit covered in park dust. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a supermax prison, Mark, Sarah said quietly, for embezzlement, for treason, and for the attempted murder of a protected citizen. Mark looked up, his eyes bloodshot. You'll fail, Sarah. You're a coder, a quiet girl. You don't know how to run an empire. The board will eat you alive by Monday morning. Sarah knelt down so she was at eye level with him. The board? She smiled. Mark, I fired the board 10 minutes ago via the global network. I replaced them with the people you stepped on to get to the top, the engineers you underpaid, the assistants you harassed, the real brains of the company. She leaned in closer, her voice a cold whisper. And about that $50,000 settlement you offered me, I've decided to be generous. I'll put $50,000 into a trust for your legal defense. You're going to need it to fight the 300 counts of corporate fraud I've already handed over to the Department of Justice. Mark let out a strangled cry as the agents hauled him to his feet. Chloe was already being led away, sobbing about her career and her reputation, the new empire. 3 months later, the headquarters of Ether Dynamics, now renamed Evergreen Tech, glowed under the Chicago moon. The quiet empire was no longer a secret. Sarah stood on the balcony of the top floor, looking out over the city. She wasn't wearing a supportive wife dress anymore. She wore a sharp-tailored black suit. Her hair was cut short, her eyes bright with purpose. Arthur Vance walked out onto the balcony, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. The restructuring is complete, ma'am, Arthur said. Stock is up 40%. The world loves the new transparent tech initiative. And Mark's trial? The judge just denied bail for the 12th time. Sarah took a sip of the water. And the employees? They're calling it the Zara era. Arthur smiled. No more fear, no more secrets. Sarah looked up at the stars. She thought about her father. She thought about the girl who sat in a garage coding until her fingers bled, believing that love meant giving everything away. She realized now that her father's silent period wasn't just about the money. It was a test of her spirit. He knew she would be betrayed. He knew she would be broken. He wanted her to find the strength to rebuild herself before he gave her the tools to rebuild the world.